Spoiler warning for the Rings of Power Season 2 in this video. If you have not seen the second season of this Lord of the Rings prequel show and wish to remain unspoiled, then I recommend skipping this video for now. You can always come back to it later when you are ready, I promise. The Rings of Power is a thing that exists. As an Amazon Prime Lord of the Rings prequel series, it is neither good nor terrible. I repeat, Internet, for the sake of clarity, The Rings of Power is not the worst thing ever. Because despite what some of the Internet's worst grifter dipshits say, The Rings of Power does not ruin the Lord of the Rings, nor is it bad because it features women, people of color, or quote-unquote wokeism. Which, quick aside, if you think that diversity and the fact that there's girls in a Lord of the Rings story automatically makes that said Lord of the Rings story bad, then congratulations! You're f***ing weird. As well as irritating, mostly because The Rings of Power as a series actually does have some creative decisions actually worth criticizing. After all, it just has too many subplots that feel unnecessary to the core story at hand, and thus causing much of the series to feel plodding, overly long, and just dull. Yes, even though The Rings of Power features some amazing visuals, cinematography, action sequences, and how cool it is to see Middle-earth in its societal pinnacle when compared to its decayed visage in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Because, between the elaborate sets and the beautiful cinematography, you can just tell that Amazon chucked a huge amount of cash at this show. The money it earns by exploiting its warehouse workers and delivery drivers. What? Am I not supposed to say that? But sadly, it is all for naught. No relation. Because the Rings of Power's plot just overall feels scattered, and many of the characters give you little reason to care for them, aside for being recognizable names and or locations from Lord of the Rings lore and history. Sure, there are some solid storylines within the show, but they are all unfortunately watered down by mundanity, meaning that the Rings of Power is overall just a drab show with little narrative juice that overall leaves a sour taste in the mouth.
Really seals in the flavor.
And this is unfortunately also true of the recently released second season of The Rings of Power. Even though, yes, Season 2 is more interesting than Season 1 and features some aspects worth further discussion. Even though, like Season 1, there's a lot of beautiful visuals, a badass epic battle sequence, and some solid character moments and storylines. Hell, the main storyline of the season, which is anything relating to Sauron and how he has a hand in the creation of the Rings of Power that are used to control the other free races of Middle-earth, kinda bangs both in terms of the interesting storytelling and also because of hot Sauron. Because that bangs too. But the issue here is that these positive qualities are overwhelmed by too many, as what I like to call, prequelisms. The type that exists to explain how the various actions and consequences eventually lead up to a main story and fill in some missing details more so than delivering an actually interesting story. The type of narratively unnecessary details that could have and should have been cut out, like how my dipshit brother should have been cut out from my dad's will, because he does not deserve that money. I do. This is a joke, by the way. I don't have a brother. But anyway, the point. The Rings of Power Season 2 spends a ludicrous amount of time on plotlines that suck or storylines that conclude in an unsatisfactory fashion. Basically meaning that the subplots that have nothing or minimally anything to do with the central core part of the story need to be bounced like a check from InfoWars. Storylines that just add dick all to the proceedings, of which there are many. Firstly, there's a Force of Isildur love storyline that serves no purpose to this narrative. Sure, there is a little bit of interest here considering Estrid, the woman that Isildur falls for, was originally aligned with the evil faction of humans that support Adar. More on that character in part 2 of this video essay series. Yet there's just minimal reason to get invested in these characters and their love storyline, considering how dull and plotting it feels. It doesn't advance Isildur's storyline all that much, and just adds nothing to the overall narrative. Hell, I even cared more about the subplot to this subplot, where Isildur rescues his dope as horse. Because hey, Isildur has an emotional connection with that equestrian. He bought the horse armor DLC. Ask your gamer parents about it. But even with that caveat, I just can't muster the same effort of giving a shit about Isildur's romantic entanglement with Estrid, seeing of how little importance it is to the overall narrative. Even though yes, this romantic plotline serves, at least in theory, a secondary purpose of showcasing how the highborn Númenórean Isildur grows to care more about a lower-born woman who has a morally complicated past, this effort of character development just doesn't really mean all that much in the grand scheme of the Rings of Power Season 2. Not enough to really make it all that distinguishing of a feature, mostly because Isildur, at least at this point of the story, was already portrayed as being a decent young man, and him falling in love with a woman with a morally murky past isn't really all that relevant to the story arcs in Season 2, or add anything enlightening to say about Isildur as a character. Meaning that there's just no reason to really care about it, considering it both fails at being relevant to the story, or potentially developing Isildur's character in a meaningful way. Because when it comes to this subplot, I just really didn't give a damn. Then there's Gandalf's pointless character development. And while yes, quick aside, I'm aware that the character is referred to as the Stranger on IMDb, the place where the magic happens, and Gandalf learns his name at the end of the second season, in fact revealing Gandalf to indeed be Gandalf, that aspect of his identity was never in doubt. I mean, it was obvious even from Season 1. He hangs out with hobbits, he does magic shit, he is not an elf, and if I recall correctly, he does get high back in the first season, meaning that this strange man is a wizard, and his name is Gandalf, a character who is iconic, a character who, as stated before, has some really bad character development in Rings of Power Season 2, who basically has an arc where he spends the entire season trying to find and getting his hands on his wizard staff.
God damn it! What was wrong with phrasing?
And that's kind of it for Gandalf. That's basically the extent of his character journey. Sure, his actions amid this arc also prove that he has compassion for others when he chooses to protect his hobbit friends in the season finale, but that is not really breaking news. If anything, Gandalf having empathy was kind of already established in Season 1 and in the earlier parts of Season 2, meaning that the main change to Gandalf's plotline and his character in this season is that he eventually gets a firm grip on his magic wood.
Two things. One, I really think we need to have a serious talk about getting phrasing back in the mess.
Then there's the horny hobbits that wanna Okay, so maybe that description is a little reductive, even though there is some truth to it. In fact, the Hobbit Poppy, no relation, and the Hobbit Merrimack, who comes from a different Hobbit community called the Stores, essentially eyeball the shit out of each other. They clearly want to bang. And admittedly, that's not the main purpose of the Hobbit plotline. In fact, the purpose of Nori's and Poppy's storyline broaches the topic of what home means. In fact, Nori, who is the Rings of Power's most prominent Hobbit, and Poppy make some discoveries in regards to their ancestors. After all, it is revealed that the Harfoots, of which are Nori's and Poppy's Hobbit clan, are descended from a store who once dreamed of the Suzat, which is essentially a home of beauty and hills that will hopefully become the Hobbit promised land that we all, as viewers at home, know to be as the Shire, a paradise of green, food, booze, and Sean Astin. And due to this dream of the Shire, that Hobbit eventually left the Stores in order to find it. Hence why in the first season, the Harfoots are nomads yearning for their forever home. And by the end of the season, the Stores' home is destroyed by the evil wizard who is probably Saruman, and then are forced to leave their said home, meaning that this storyline, despite its problems, has some thematic messaging where there's an emphasis on the meaning of home, which you know is a prominent staple in the Lord of the Rings franchise, considering that there's always some hobbits that discuss what home is, or what it's like to go through hard times in order to get back to that said home, either through the narrative itself or a grandiose speech. As I said, it's common in this series. But here is the thing. We already established Nori's and Poppy's view of home, i.e. where the family is and where you hope to be for the betterment of future generations in the Rings of Power Season 1, which means that when the Stores need to leave their home in hopes of finding a new one, it just kind of feels like a repeat of the thematic storytelling from the first season. Hence why I overall find this plotline to be dull, save for the amusement I had for the earlier mentioned hobbits that really want to bone. Then there's the Númenor political drama, which is kind of interesting, actually. In this storyline, Queen Regent Muriel is trying to hold on to power, all while her political rival Pharazôn plots a coup, including with Isildur's sister, Eärien, a noteworthy name because it has many vowels. And Captain Elendil, who is the father of both Isildur and king, grapples with his protective nature to defend the queen from the awful machinations of Númenórean's rival politicians, all while being honor-bound to obey a queen who doesn't desire an escalation to the conflict or further bloodshed. And admittedly, this plotline has a few good moments, even though there is one critical flaw. A problem spawning from the fact that the motivations of the plotline's antagonist, Pharazôn, isn't really explained all that much. Like, yeah, Pharazôn desires to stage a coup because he hates the elves, but the reason why he hates the elves so damn much is never really explained. Sure, the entire Númenórean nation and people only exist because of the gift of the longer-lasting life that the elves gave them generations ago, but that's honestly kind of a shitty reason to loathe them. I mean, maybe I'm way off base here, but if the elves blessed me with a life that lasts way longer than that of an ordinary human, and then I also lived at the pinnacle of human civilization, I'd be grateful to be so damn fortunate. I mean, yeah, the Númenóreans won't live forever like the elves do, but that's not really a reason to look a gift horse in the mouth, though, is it? Because if anything, Pharazôn's ire is akin to a 2000s kid opening presents on Christmas and sulking because they only received an Xbox 360, but not the Wii and the PS3 as well. Something that just makes you want to say, what the f*** is wrong with you? The PS3 costs $600. Your elf mommy is doing the best she f***ing can. Meaning that Pharazôn, as well as his dickhead son by extension, just comes across as one-dimensional, causing Pharazôn to be a weak element in an overall decent subplot. Maybe another pass of the script could have done a better job at laying out Pharazôn's reasons for disliking the elves, or, you know, any reason at all, as well as connecting how Sauron is manipulating him, aside from how Pharazôn uses the Palantir, which cannot be trusted. And then finally, there's the insignificant plotline involving rogue elf dude Arondir and his paternal relationship with his deceased love interest son named Theo. A storyline that is so forgettable, pointless, and unnecessary to anything that I won't be mentioning it again in this video essay series unless my life is threatened. Please don't kill me.
Who cares?
So yeah, The Rings of Power Season 2 has some problems. In fact, there are too many dull, boring, and unnecessary character arcs that overall prevent it from being a good show. Much like how your football team's prevent defense prevents your team from winning. And that's just too damn bad considering that the core story of The Rings of Power Season 2 has some merits. As I said, there are good aspects to this narrative, positive qualities that overall make the show, if not necessarily good, then at the very least interesting, which admittedly, despite all its faults, is more than what I can say about The Rings of Power Season 1, a show where I pretty much forgot everything that happened save for how Halbrand was revealed to be Hot Sauron. That stuck with me. Even though some of The Rings of Power Season 2's better storylines do have imperfections as well, and rest assured, we will eventually be talking about that shit, those said storylines, even with their problems, are worthy of discussion and even worth praising in some capacity. If anything, in The Rings of Power Season 2, there are some narratives that have actual value. To be continued in Part 2.